All right, welcome back to part two of live QGIS bug fixing. Um, so I don't know if you've watched the previous stream, but in our previous one, there was a bunch of bugs we looked at. We looked at three different bugs, and we managed to fix two of them. We found the cause of the last one, but it was it was going to be too tricky. It was going to be too time consuming to actually fix that. So we kind of shelved that one for now. But in that in yesterday's stream anyway, we ended up submitting two different pull requests. So we fixed this one bug here, which was the file name prefix is no longer shown when adding layers from a GPX file to QGIS. We also fixed this one, a crash when labeling features and showing unplaced labels, and some labels have no candidate positions. Anyway, so yesterday we looked at those. We looked at we kind of dug into it and actually worked out the cause of them, but probably not a surprise to anybody who's done programming before. Uh, Sleeping on overnight, things sort of burn away in the back of your brain, and your subconscious gets to work at stuff. And turns out, first off, I'm not really happy with the fix we did for this one, this crash when we were labeling features. So we kind of fixed it. I put this little mark on here to say I need to write a unit test for it as well. Um, but I want to go back and just revisit this one because I'm not 100% sure that there's not something deeper that is actually causing this. So I want to have a look at that one again. But first, we've also got this first pull request we did, the file name prefix no longer shown when adding layers from GPX file. So with this one, we worked out that there was a change that somebody had made for QGIS 3.14, which introduced this bug. But that change was kind of part of a much bigger commit, and the little couple of lines of code that actually caused this, basically the removal of this little bit of logic to say make the layer name from the file name with a space and the layer name, that was taken out in that commit. But if we look at the actual commit that caused that regression, this one here, it was a much bigger piece of work, and that kind of little change was just one little part of a general larger reworking of this kind of select layers to add dialog, and there was no kind of explanation for why that little change was made. But in our pull request overnight, so we asked the original author, why that logic was changed, and we've got an answer here, and it says it was uh, it was probably done because if you're adding the layers to a group, then you already have that. I'll just explain what I mean by that. So here's my QGIS again. Let me fire this up. This is a master build, so this doesn't include that. That's not on the branch with the pull request that's got the fix for it. And if I find my GPX file again, where are we? GPX. So I chuck this in here. So the bug is that if I just add all these layers in previous QGIS releases, we'd get the file name prefixed on here so that you knew exactly what all these layers are from, because these are kind of generic sub-layer names. Now, apparently this logic was changed because you'll see in this dialog here, there's actually an option here, this little checkbox to say add the layers to a group. And if that one's ticked and I do OK, you can see we've already got a group name here that gives us that file name. So if I find my old, where are we? My old QGIS 3.12 build. Let's make this bigger. Hmm. I've got a whole bunch of old QGIS builds here, which are kind of handy if I need to check something against an old build. So I've got a 3.12 build here. Let's just run that. So 312 before this bug was introduced. Find my GPX. So if in with the old logic where we were always doing that file name space layer name behavior, then I if this checkbox is ticked, we're adding layers to a group. We're basically getting redundant information here. We've got the file name here, and then we've also got the file name in each of these individual layers inside that group. So that is the justification of why that logic was changed. Was basically if you've got this thing ticked, it's redundant information. The issue is that if that's not ticked, then it's not redundant information, and we need to fix that. So I'm just going to go back to my branch that had this fix in it. So here's the branch that I used to make my pull request. I'll check that back out. Let's make this bigger again. Another thing I'm going to just do quickly is I'm going to rebase this one against the master branch because I did a build off QGIS master earlier this morning, and QGIS can take a while to build. So if I switch back the branch and I rebuild now, I'm probably going to be waiting for 5 minutes or something while it rebuilds. But if I rebase it off master, then the build should be pretty nice and quick, hopefully. Um, so nice, pretty quick, and that's partly because when I set up my QGIS build, I set it up to use the Ninja build system, and also it's got C cache sitting in the background there, so it's kind of doing as much as we can to get a fast QGIS build. It's kind of like if you do a build from scratch on this computer at least, it'll take like 20 minutes or something to do a full QGIS build. It's a bit painful. Here it's not too bad. Okay, so now we know that my pull request is not quite right because my pull request brings back the 3.12 behavior where if we're adding it to a group, we're getting the redundant information. So we actually want to tweak this logic. We want to tweak this logic so it looks like this. If that add to group option is ticked when you're picking the layers from the GPX, then we don't need to add the file name because it's already in the group name. That's redundant. If you don't tick that option, then we want to include the file name. So it basically needs to be dependent on if that add to group option is ticked. So hurry up and build. So we need to kind of get that logic into this bug fix and make it that the behavior changes depending on that checkbox. This is kind of cool because it gives me an opportunity to show something that I keep coming back to. Like when I'm looking at the QGIS code, there's nearly a million lines of code here, and there's like we looked at yesterday, there's kind of multiple libraries. We've got the app library, the core library, we've got data provider library, and each of these has got probably a couple of hundred files in here. So it can be really daunting when you're first looking at this code base of like, I want to make a change. I don't even know where there's a billion files here, where to look to actually make that change. I mean, it's even daunting for me, like, and I've been looking at this code base for a long time. So what I would tend to do in a situation like this is, as soon as this decides to finish building, it's nearly there. All right. Is I'd run QGIS and just have a look. So we know the checkbox that we're kind of interested in is this one here, this add layers to group. Add layers to our group. That's what the checkbox is called. Now, if I don't know exactly where in the massive QGIS code base that is, or the logic to a certain part of QGIS is, I'll tend to look for some little clue inside the dialog or inside the bit of QGIS I'm interested in. So maybe if I was looking at a bug or a feature in the simple marker thing, maybe I'd look for some of the text that's written in this dialog here, like anchor point or join style. But in this case, the thing we're kind of interested in is this thing that says add layers to a group. So I'll go back to my terminal over here. Um, and again, I don't know where exactly that checkbox lives in the QGIS code base. So I'm going to just do this. I'm going to do a git grep, and I'll just put in that string, add layers, layers to a group. What have we got? So we've got something from the changelog. That's useless. A whole bunch of stuff from this the translation folders. Again, that's kind of useless. It's not really giving us any clues. But at the end here, so we've got one hit in a file in source UI QGIS sublayers dialog base.ui. We can see there's that string. So let's have a look at this file, source UI QGIS sublayers dialog base.ui. So back here, source UI QGIS sublayers. So this UI file, it's like a Qt designer form, so that it's like an XML file that describes where these buttons sit and checkboxes and stuff. And this is good. This is the one we're looking for because we can see that here's the dialog in my running QGIS. Here's the dialog in my Qt Creator, and it's got these buttons and it's got that checkbox. So that was a checkbox that we were interested in because we want to modify this logic so it's dependent on the state of that checkbox, if that's checked or not. So what I'll do now is I'll just click on this one, and I'm looking over here at this object name. So that kind of is the identifier for this little checkbox. I'm going to grab this one again, and I want to find out where this is actually being referenced in the code. So like a UI file is just the definition of where these widgets sit and stuff. It doesn't actually have, like, it looks like this. Doesn't actually have any C++ code or any Python code or any kind of logic in there. So I'll just go back here and I'll do another git grep in the name of that widget. And what have we got? So we've got some hits coming up in this thing, QGIS sublayers dialog.cpp, something in QGIS sublayers dialog.h, and then again in that UI file. So let's have a look in here because this looks like where the actual logic behind that dialog sits. So I'm going to grab that, throw it into this little locator down here, go to that file. And we can see here's the actual code that sits behind that dialog, and I'll make it bigger. So there's stuff in here that does stuff like it changes the title depending on if you're adding vector layers or raster layers or mesh layers, bunch of other stuff. Here's a thing that says my combo box add to group is for some reason initially false. I don't know why that is, but anyway, is originally initially hidden, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this one, and I'm just going to see where this is used. I'm going to right click on this combo box reference, find references to that. And we've got something in the header. We've got something in a couple of matches in the CPP file. So I'm just going to look through this and seeing some of them are about setting whether that combo box is visible or not. One of them here is about, it's basically, so this is add to group. It's looking at the QGIS settings to see was it previously checked? If so, kind of restore that state. And we've also got something here that this must be when you accept that dialog, it's saving the previous state. But it looks like this is the useful one. So in my header, I've actually got this method here that says add to group checkbox, and if it returns if we should add layers in a group. So this is useful because this is what we're going to base the new logic on. So again, I'm just going to right click on this. I'm going to find where this is being used from find references. So we've got one hit, which is the actual definition of it. That's not what we're interested in. And we've got one hit again in this massive QGIS app CPP file that we looked at yesterday. where we've actually made our fix. All right. Hmm. Okay, so this hit here is being called from something called this add ask user for MDEL sublayers. Now MDEL is the mesh data library. So this thing will only be called for mesh layers, and that's not relevant for what we're looking at, which is kind of odd because we know for certain that checkbox is there, and whatever we pick here actually changes for my vector layer. So, where else could this be? All right, I'm gonna go back a little bit because we knew yesterday the bug fix we were making was in this thing, ask user for OGR sublayers, not for MDEL sublayers. Just gonna have a look through here. I'm gonna see if I can see in this thing something about making a group. Set add to group checkbox true. Mm, okay, so here we go. We're looking through this the bit of code that's actually doing it for the vector layers. So asking the users for the vector sub layer and then working out which ones to add. Scroll right down here, and we eventually get to this thing where we've got something that like this looks good. You know, it's called add to group, and you can see here it's actually getting it from the settings. So while we found this thing, this method that lets us directly retrieve if that combo box was checked, that checkbox was checked, this add to group checkbox living in QGIS sublayers dialog class. Here, it's actually using a different approach because it's relying on that saved value, that stored value. So we actually saw that previously, that somewhere in here, when they click OK to that, we had this little thing here that says if they yeah. So where it actually saved that value, if it's checked, then settings.set value open sublayers and group. So it's saving it to this settings registry, and then back here we're actually reading it back from there instead of getting it directly from the dialog. Um, I kind of like cleaning up code when I see something that's a bit confusing here. So I'm gonna clean this up a little bit, and I'm gonna just use that direct method. So here, just after the dialog's been run, I'm just going to save that setting as a bool, add to group, and this equals the choose sub layers dialog dot add to group. So we'll get it directly from the dialog instead of retrieving it at a later stage from the settings. And now I can get rid of this bit of code because we've already got this thing, add to group. I'll just double check that I didn't break anything by doing that. So I'll just rebuild that really quickly. The benefit now is if someone else comes in here and they're looking at this sublayers dialog and they are trying to see where else this setting is used, like we did originally, and they right click, find references, we can now see, we've now got two references. So we can see, yeah, it's been referenced from ask user for OGR sublayers and also that other hit that we were getting for the mesh layers, sublayers. That's a bit easier for someone in future to find out exactly where that setting's being used instead of going through that settings registry where you can't see that there's a direct link. Um, I'm just going to test that I didn't break anything. I'm not going to check it. Okay, they weren't added to a group. Good. That one, let's check it. They were added to a group. So we didn't break anything. Good. Now I just need to go back into here and in my bit of code that I fixed, which was about line, whatever, 6056. We had this little thing. So this is the fix that we reintroduced yesterday, where instead of just taking the layer name, the sublayer name as our QGIS layer name, we put back in that logic to say it should be the file name and a space in that. So now we're going to tweak this a little bit because our new logic was going to be if add to group. So if we're adding it to a group, all we need is the layer name. Otherwise, we'll do the file name and the space and the layer name. And I'm just going to make that const because it kind of is grading at me. Here's another thing that really annoys me that I'll fix up at the same time because we're going in here and we're trying to make things better. When I run my QGIS like this, we get all this debug kind of output that comes out into my console. Sort of historically, this has just been used as a dumping ground for any kind of message. So if you went back to like, I don't know, QGIS 3.4 or something, there'd be like millions and millions of lines of debug output is just getting churned out here. There's been an ongoing effort to clean this up so that the only messages that come out here by default, unless you set some environment variables, are actually errors, like important stuff that you need to see. And if I look here, just here, so here's a good use, for instance, here's logging a debug message for an unexpected output. So that's the sort of stuff that we should be throwing out to the console. But I noticed when I was just at this code here, we've got this thing here. It's throwing out a debug message to say we're creating a new layer. I don't like that because it means that we'll be getting like this. We're getting output debug noise that's hiding. The more of that, the less likely that the actual errors get shown in that. So I'm just going to tweak this while it's here and while my eyes are looking at it to push it down. So instead of being shown by default, it's now hidden by default unless you put in an environment variable to say, show me all the level 2 debug messages as well. So we'll just make that code a bit nicer that way too. All right, so anyway, here's our new logic. The new layer name, if we're adding it to a group, we don't need to include the file name, otherwise we do. And I'll also add a little comment here just to that nature to say, if user has opted to add sublayers to a group, then we don't need to include the file name in the layers name because the group is already titled with the file name. But otherwise, we do include the file name so that users can differentiate the source when multiple layers are loaded from a GPX file or similar. Let me just put a little reference in here to say that there's kind of more information about this logic sitting in this ticket here in case anyone else comes here later. Okay, let's check this. Let's see if we fix this one for good with our cool new logic that we like. So let's add them to a group. Okay, that's good. So we've got the file name is a part of the group name, but not as the sublayer names. Let's try it again without that. Ticked. So now we've got the file name and we don't have the group. So that's perfect. That's exactly the logic we want. So I think we've fixed this bug for good. Let's just have a look. Okay. So grab all that and let's add another commit. Revise logic, automatic, inclusion for the sublayers. And then yeah, I'll just copy this whole comment here because this is like describes it anyway. And we'll give a nice descriptive commit message. So if someone else is looking in Git blame or something, then they've got lots of information. Cool. So there's our new bug fix. Is this these two commits? So let's push that back to the branch. Because it's my branch, I'm okay to do this force push thing. You know, if I was working directly on like a QGIS master, which then force push would be really bad. But it's my fork. This is my branch. I'm able to do a force push. That's fine. And I have to do a force push in this case because I did that rebase earlier. Let's go back and let's have a look. So we've got our new revised logic is sitting there. And all is good. So now I can just make a little comment on here. I'll just say new logic is implemented. Now we only add the file name prefix if the layers aren't being added to a group. Should be good to merge. Cool. So that's a better fix. Better fix for that bug. So now really happy. We know we're not kind of trouncing on someone else's work by undoing their change, and it's cool. It's good logic. I like it. All right, now let's go back to this tricky one. So this is the third bug we looked at yesterday. This one here. Let me jump across back to this branch. Actually, I don't want to go to that branch. I'm going to go back to master. Because I want to get back to a branch where it's got that bug in it. Because like I said, so yesterday we were looking at this and we kind of worked out that the actual cause of the bug looked to be this condition was a bit wrong, and the logic actually had to say, well, we've got to move this condition out of there. But then that was kind of the fix of the crash. At least it solved the crash. But then we tried to do a bit of cleaning up work here to make this code more readable because it's not at all readable at the moment. But I'm not super happy with that with that with that fix. So I've just jumped back to the master branch, and I just want to see if there's some other ways I can reproduce the original bug. So this one here, the bug report. Partly because the demo project that they've attached to this bug report was pretty complicated. Like it had heaps of lines, heaps of features on there. So if I wanted to add a unit test to cover this, I'd prefer not to have to reuse that data set. Like easier if I could get a situation where I could reproduce it with just a single feature. Um, and in this case, what we what we kind of found out was that the crash seemed to be happening when we had a situation where there was a feature that didn't have any label candidates. So there was no way that we could possibly put a label on it. So I'm going to try and reset that up by just making a line layer here with a nice little short feature, tiny little line in there. I'll turn on labels for this and I'll just give it a fixed constant value that's massive. So this one here, right, that string, it's too big to fit on there. If it was short, then it could fit, but at the moment it's too long, and I'm set here not to allow any run past the edge of that line, so we don't get a label for that feature. So this is kind of similar to what I think was the underlying situation that was causing that crash. But the other thing that they'd enabled is they'd also ticked this little box. So in that project that was provided to replicate this issue, they had this option ticked to show basically like red placeholders for labels that can't be placed. Um, I'm just going to tick this. Okay, so we don't get a crash now. So that's one thing I wanted to check, was to see if we could reproduce that issue with just a nice simple test case like this. Tiny line, big label, that setting on, but we're not. So I'm just going to look back here. Where was that change we made yesterday? Was in this thing. Problem get solution. Get that in here. If I type in M, then I can search for like members of a class. So I can search for my problem get solution. Okay, so here's the thing. And here, again, I've switched back to master branch, so we don't have that bug fix. But our previous solution was about moving this bit of logic out of here and up to kind of the top level. So instead of this being a shortcut that didn't apply this check as well, even if this was true, we still had to pass this check before this thing hit. Um, put a breakpoint in there. I'm just going to see what's happening here. Go refresh my map. Okay. Hmm. Okay, so yesterday when we were testing this one, again, the issue was being triggered when this thing was true, when return inactive was true, and that's what the fix we did yesterday kind of relied on, is that this thing was true, but it can't be a direct shortcut because we also have to apply this second criteria. In this case, this thing is false, so that is probably explaining why I'm not seeing the bug at the moment. But I thought this thing was controlled by this button, and it's not. So let's just have a look and see what it actually is being controlled by. So I'm going to right click here, find references to see where this is called from. So we've got one reference is the actual, like the declaration of it, there's the definition of it. Here's where it's the only place it's being called from. So let's just have a look. So this return inactive is controlled by something, it's set by display all. And looks like we've got to follow the chain back a bit, because so display all is coming from this argument. Let's find where this is used. So we've got again the actual definition of it, but here's the only place it's called, and this second argument is coming from this thing. So this settings, so when our label engine settings has a flag set to use all labels, what does this mean? We'll follow it. So this flag means whether to draw all labels even if there would be collisions. So maybe I'm wrong. Oh, I was wrong. So it's not that setting. It is must be this setting. No, it's not that setting because these label engine settings, these are global things. Sorry, lost you there for a second. I pressed a button on my keyboard which disconnects the network. Why they put a button on my keyboard that disconnects the network, I don't know. Am I back? Am I back? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so these settings are actually global. They're not a. These are all applying just to one layer, but the actual setting that I'm looking for here is a global setting, and that's actually controlled in this thing. So when I go to this little applies to all layers setting thing, it's this one, show all labels for all layers. So it's when that's ticked. Now I should expect, let's put that breakpoint back. Now I should expect, yeah, so return inactive is true now. And the other thing I think I need to do is I think I need to turn that one back on. So, no, I still don't hit that. Hmm. Hmm. So I'm just trying to work out why it was crashing in that other test project, but not in this one. Maybe I have to tick that as well. Uh-huh. Okay, I'm going to go back to that test, to this original test project. Yeah. Because I just want to have a look. So they've got in this test project, they've definitely got that red button ticked on for the unplaced labels. So we've got these two settings are switched on that show all labels. What are the layer settings set to? So they've got an overrun set. And it was actually when we had to go to that online mode to trigger that bug. But anyway, let's just copy some of these. So we've got parallel, 10 millimeters. It was online, and those other settings. So I'll go back. I'll go back and actually one last thing I want to just check. So 23700. May as well do that as well. 23700. So I'll use the same coordinate reference system as they had in their sample data. Little line, big label that doesn't fit. That one, and we'll go online only. Still no crash. They also had that setting. Let's try. Oh, they also had that one. Let's just do this. Hmm. So there's something else at play here. What else is different about their labels? So they got callouts checked. Well, what I'll do is I'm just going to right click this and I'm going to, going to go in here, save this particular setting, all these settings out to a QML file, chuck it in here, crashy lines, so that when I try and reproduce on a nice clean data set, I can reload that QML. Turn that one off. No, turn that one on. Turn those off. Turn that on. Turn that on. Do we still have do we have a crash? No crash yet. Maybe I have to. Now I've got a crash. So it looks like I have to have two. Let's try that again, actually. So I'll go back to my line string, this coordinate reference system. So I had like two line strings like this, kind of next to each other, a bit like their test data set. Big long label for that. What else did they have? They had callouts on there. I think it was set to that. They had that setting on. They had these two settings on. And we had that one on only. So no crash. I also had this as like 50 mils, I think. Still no crash. So there's something else in that QML that's actually triggering this. So what else is unique about this setting? I mean, what else is unusual in this configuration? No, nothing unusual, nothing unusual. I don't think it's that. Pound 10, no repeat, overrun distance 50. That's nothing. That's different. That's not the default setting, so maybe it relates to that. Wait, that's not checked. All right, so let's Kill that again. See if I can make a something. So online that, leave the rest of that. Again, tick these things because those were definitely there. And then I'm going to crank this one up. Aha. Okay, good. Good, good. QGIS just crashed. So that's good. Because what that means is now I've got like a really simple test case that I can use for to reproduce this. So instead of having a that massive data set that they had in their bug report, um, I can now make a unit test that's got just a nice simple way of reproducing this. Um, so now we get to look at unit tests in QGIS. And there's two different ways that tests are done in the QGIS source code. So if I look in my, let's go into my QGIS folder. Under this tests folder, so here's where it all lives. If I look at the source code, we've got some in here that are C++ tests. So some tests are written in C++, some are written in Python. Probably most are written in Python actually, because it's just quicker. It's quicker, and also it's basically, if a test is written in Python, it kind of has two purposes. Because one is it's testing that underlying C++ code, but then secondly, it's also testing the QGIS Python bindings. So if there's an issue that you only see when you're using PyQGIS, for instance, if a test is written in Python, then it'll reveal that as well. So it's good. Um, but in this case, I know that most of the actual kind of core fundamental labeling tests are actually written in C++, and I'm going to just find them. They are in tests source. It's in the core library. It's in the labeling thing. It's one of those core reusable bits of QGIS. We've got this thing here, QGIS labeling engine test. So in my Qt Creator, the first thing I'm going to just do is run this test, QGIS labeling engine test. I'll just make sure it's nice and clean and it's passing on my computer. Okay, good. Zero failed. Just in case, there's a test that is failing locally for some reason. I'll just check that first. Okay, so test QGIS labeling engine. So this is where I want to add my new test to. You can see there's a whole bunch of tests in here to do things like testing labels, substitutions, testing whatever, rotate, hide, partial. But we'll put it in here because this is like it's kind of like a core labeling engine thing, debug. This is a good spot to put it. And add new test. Test show all labels when a label has no candidates. That's what we have to do to actually trigger this test, this failure. So just add the definition of that, like that. Now, generally, if I'm writing a test, I'll keep my fingers crossed that someone else has already written a similar test in the past and I don't have to do everything from scratch, because if I have to do it from scratch, it means I've got to know a lot about all the different QGIS classes to actually get to a stage where I can set it up to test what I'm interested in. In this case, this file, test QGIS labeling engine, has a whole bunch of tests for different things of labeling, and I'm just going to shortcut and I'm going to grab one of these ones, the guts of some other previous test that someone's written. Let's just get all that. Copy that, throw it into my new test, and I'll update this test to check my new situation. So don't want to have to write it from scratch. That's too much work. So this one is testing test that showing all labels when a label has no candidate placements, doesn't result in a crash. And let's just put this in here. So this one references this ticket. There. Okay, I'm going to go back into my QGIS again, because what I have to do now is I've got to sort of make this unit test replicate that crash that I got in QGIS. So I knew in QGIS to do that, I was making a temporary layer, a line layer in 23700. So I'm just going to look for here, that test I copied and pasted. It's got a similar thing. It makes a vector layer here. Line string in this CRS for that test was 3946. Mine was now 23700. So that'll basically make a new vector layer using this memory provider. So it's an even memory layer, line string 23700. And then we've got this line of code here. So this says we make a new layer. I don't know what it's called, vector layer 2, but who cares? And then the next thing we do is we set the renderer to null symbol renderer, which is like when we go in QGIS and I put some features in here, and then I say no symbol, so don't show those lines. The reason that's done in this unit test is we're not testing the rendering of the lines, so we don't really care about, we don't want to include them in the unit test. But while I'm writing the test, I'm going to comment this out because it'll be useful to actually see those lines just to make sure that the features are in the right spot. I've thrown two features in there. What I'm going to just do is use my selection tool, grab those two, copy those. And the reason I'm doing that is that will give me this WKT string for those two geometries. And I'll just delete off all these decimal places because I don't think we need them. I don't think we need that for that to trigger the bug. So here's my two features. This unit test I already copied, already was adding two features, so I can just move our new geometries there, like that, like that. Okay, so we're making a vector layer in memory. For now, we're leaving the renderer. We'll see the lines. We're basically making a QGIS feature, setting its geometry to one of those lines, adding it to the layer, making another one, adding it to the layer. This previous unit test had three. I only need two to do this. A whole lot of boilerplate code here, which is setting up a map settings so we can actually do a map render. Because this test, what we'll actually want to do is we'll do a render of that situation to see if we can trigger the bug. Another thing I better just do here. So this map settings has got a little thing here to set the map extent. I want to replicate how I was crashing QGIS, so it kind of looked, I was sort of roughly like that, I guess. So I'm just going to change this little coordinate display down here from the mouse cursor coordinate to the extents, because then I can just copy this, go into here, and I'm going to say, this is my map extent, is a QGIS rectangle, like that. So when my unit test runs, it's basically going to do a render of a map with that extent, those two features there, kind of replicating how we did the test. Now, the other thing I need to do here is I've got to set up a few things because we knew that the crash only happens when this setting is ticked, show all labels for all layers. And we worked out previously that that was a label engine setting called use all labels. So we kind of tracked that down just before. And we're kind of lucky because there's already a whole lot of stuff in here that's setting things for label engine settings. Copy this, and this was what was it? Use all labels. So use all labels is true. What else have we got? We had to tick this one, show unplaced labels. I think that's also in here. Yep, draw unplaced labels. So that's another flag that we have to set. So let's get this, and we'll put this here, draw unplaced labels. Now I'll clean up a few bits of junk here. That's all from that other unit test. We only need to do one test. Um, okay, so this QGIS unit tests, when we do it, it's setting all this thing up. It's making a map render job. So we're going to actually render the map. And then we do it and we get the image, that rendered image. And then here's the actual guts of that test is we're saying verify that we check that image, the rendered image, and it has to match something. This is all described if I go into Google and I search for QGIS developer documentation. This thing, developer's guide for QGIS. Developer's guide for QGIS. So someone a long time ago wrote all this up. Worth reading if you're looking at QGIS development. But the relevant bit is this bit. So unit testing. It's got this really nice write-up of how to write unit tests for QGIS and how they're kind of structured in that. And the relevant bit you can read up here, this bit about comparing images for rendering tests. Because QGIS has this sort of setup where we can say, set the layer up this way, style it this way, render it out, and then compare it to a reference image and see if the two are close enough that we're getting what we expect. All these reference images sit in the QGIS tests, test data, control images folder. And then there's hundreds here. I could have a look and see. Here's a reference image for expected call out, draw to all parts, simple. That's what the reference image looks like. So somewhere there'll be a unit test that sets up this, does the render, compares the result to this expected one, and make sure it hasn't broken. There's billions here. I'm going to go into there's a folder here, labeling engine. So here's a whole bunch of unit tests or reference images for the labeling engine tests. So the stuff that lives with this file. And again, you can see there's stuff like expected curved anchor end. So this is if you have a curved label setting and you've anchored them to the end of a line, these boxes basically represent where the characters should sit. So the unit test will check that. Now what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to grab any of these, copy that whole folder, paste it, and I'm just going to rename this folder to my new test, because what did I call this test? Something about show all labels when a label has no candidates. They all have to start with expected underscore, expected show all labels when no candidates. So that's my folder name. I'm going to copy that as well, because inside this folder, expected show all labels, you can see there's one. That should be there. There's another file with the same name, so this has to be the same name but PNG extension. So the folder name and the file name have to be the same. This is a a comparison image for a different render, but I'm kind of lazy, so I'll usually just copy that. Now I've got something to compare it to, so I can go back in here, and in that bit where I'm doing my image check, I'll paste that file name, rip off this expected prefix. So basically do a whole lot of stuff, set up that thing, render the image, and then compare it to this. I know that for now, my reference image is a junk image. It relates to a totally different test case, but it's enough that I can do this. I'm just building now. And then I'm going to run my test. So the QGIS labeling engine test. It's gonna, oh, actually, yeah. So before I do that, I'll bring up this. I'm gonna go to my temp folder because this is where all the images get dumped to. So when it does that test render, it saves the result out here, like this thing, and then it compares it against the reference image. So that's like what it actually rendered for that image. And then it does this diff against the reference one. That looks good. There's nothing different. If there was something that had changed, it would be flagged in a red pixel. Um, but it also makes this folder, this file, sorry, qgistest.html. It's a bit silly because if I rerun this test, it doesn't overwrite that. So I'm going to just delete that first. Then I'm going to run my test. Da, 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 da. So one failed. My new test failed. That's who cares? It's fine. The reference image is junk. But now I can reopen this one, qgistest.html. And it gives me this nice little report so I can see in here all the different tests that this particular one's doing. Got a whole bunch in there. Right down the bottom here, here's my show all my new test I've written, and it's saying that what was rendered versus that reference image is different as expected. But this little HTML report that it throws out has got a bit of JavaScript in there to say that you can kind of hover the mouse over here and compare what was rendered. So that was what's rendered. That's the reference image. I can click between them. If it's a test that passed like this one, I expect it to be identical. But in this case, it's different. That's good. And here's that diff image where it's highlighting in red pixels the stuff that's different between the reference image versus so the reference image, the one with the text versus my actual rendered one. I just ran that anyway because I wanted to just make sure those two little lines were showing. So yeah, that's good. The little lines are showing like they did here. So um, I'm pretty confident now that the annoying bits of this test have worked, like creating those features, setting the map extent. We're getting two little lines here. So now we're ready to actually put the useful stuff of my test in here. Now the next thing we knew is to actually make this crash happen, I had to turn on the labels. I had to set the text string for these to something that was bigger than the actual length of the line, so something like this. So I'll do that in here as well. So this line here is saying that the field name for my to take those labels from, if I went to look at this thing, the name of the field or expression to use for the label text. If the field name is an expression, use expression should be set to true. So in this case, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to set use expression to true, and my my expression for the field name is actually something like this, just like that. So same as what I put in here. This is a little expression, xxxx. So a bit of text that's too big to fit on that label. I also know that this thing, there was something about it had to be set to only that online mode. So I'll just change this setting. Actually, that one needs to be the parallel mode because that's how we trigger it. So it's got to be parallel, it's got to be online. So I'll change it to the online placement. Let's get rid of that. What else do we have to do? We had to trigger this bug, we had to say that obstacle thing, we had to crank that right up to 10. So I've got to go to my layer settings for the labels. Let's have a look at this class. There's something in here about obstacle. It's junk. Yeah, so it's in this thing here, obstacle settings. So my my layer my layers label settings has a reference here from obstacle settings to this class. QGIS label obstacle settings. If I go to that, so in here we can see here's that obstacle factor. So this is the one we're kind of interested in. So 1 is the default, that's that 50% mark. Less than 1 is more likely, so that's less than 1. Greater than 1 is less likely, so that's less likely. So we know we've got to crank that right up. So we've got to crank it up to a value greater than 1. So I'll go back here, my settings, my obstacle settings, dot set factor, I don't know, 10. So I think that's enough to actually, hopefully, reproduce this bug. So I'll rebuild it. And I'll run that test. Fingers crossed it'll crash for me. Didn't crash. Didn't crash. Let's see what the rendered image was from my temp folder. Show all labels. So these green boxes are again that kind of extent of the text that's being rendered. What else did I have to change? So I had to change that up to there. I had to turn that on, which we've done in the test. I had to turn that on, which we've done in the test. I had to set that to online, which again we've done in the test. So this is all done. What was the last thing we had to do to make that crash happen? I think this was set to like 50. Does that? Yeah, okay. So this is relevant too. So I've got to set my overrun distance to 50 for that crash to happen. See, crashed. So I'm going to look back in here in my my layer settings, my label layer settings. Something in here about overrun. Do a find overrun. That's not it. That's not it. Can't find it in there, the actual option to set that. So what I'm going to do is I'll just do again in my Qt creator in this find thing. I'm going to hit advanced. I'm going to search for the whole code base for overrun because I know that somewhere in there's a way of setting that overrun distance to, and I want to set it to the 50 millimeters that actually triggers the bug. And in this case, it looks like, here we go, there's a class called QGIS label line settings, and this has got some stuff in here about overrun distance. And we can see here, so in QGIS label line settings class, QGIS label line settings, there's a method in here, set overrun distance. So that's the one we're looking for. So how do we get to that from our label, our layer settings for the label? QGIS label line settings. Let's go back to my, go back to get back to this class, QGIS PAL layer settings. This is where all the kind of general settings relating to the labels for a layer are. And I'll just do a find in here for QGIS label line settings. Let's have a look. Okay, so here's the thing. So if we call the line settings getter on our layers label settings, then we get that. So back in here, I'll do that. I'll go line settings dot set overrun distance was 50 millimeters. Save and build, and hopefully now it will crash for me when I run my unit test. Come on. Didn't crash. Didn't crash. All right. So something else I haven't set up correctly in this test that means we're not reproducing the same circumstances exactly. What else might me be missing? Might be this thing. Use all to replace. Let's see if it was that. Come on, crash. No, no crash. There's the field name, expression, placement line, putting it on the line. Don't think it's that. Alright, well let's just test this again. So I'm going to grab that, reset up all this again. Boring. Paste my two lines back in here. So there's that again. So there's the field here, online, 50, massive. That had to be on, that had to be on. No crash yet. Now crash. I've inherited some code from that previous unit test that I copied and pasted. Let's get rid of that because maybe. Just get rid of this just in case. Use all, draw unplaced. So that looks pretty similar to that setup where we got the crash. Okay, so what I'll do now is what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a breakpoint here right before we actually start doing that render. We've set up all the settings for it, such and such and such, and then we're doing that render. I'm going to just put that breakpoint and run it in debug. I think we're pretty close. I think we're nearly there, but there must be one thing we're missing setting up in this unit test that's not triggering that crash. Okay, so here's our breakpoint's been hit. I'll go back to this problematic bit of code, problem get solution, put a breakpoint there. So this is where hopefully I'm going into this middle branch here where we were triggering the crash from. Now this little thing here is true, so that's what we wanted. Return inactive is true. That's good. We should have this one should be when I was triggering the crash through my actual QGIS, not through the unit test. This number here was 2. It had two features. Now I've got 0. So maybe what it actually is. I'm gonna try something. I'm gonna try just getting rid of some of these characters. I'm gonna try getting rid of that many. I'm just going with my gut here. Yeah, Yeah, good. Okay, so what was happening is our labels were actually too long. So our labels were too many characters. Where was that reference image? They were way too long, and they're actually exceeding that overrun distance. So we were saying you could go up to 50 millimeters past the end of this line here. So I don't know where that is, like here maybe. Um, and it seems like the bug, this crash is happening when our labels are sitting within that allowable overrun distance, but they're overlapping and all those other settings are combined. But this is good because now we've got this is great. We've got a unit test that exactly replicates this crash. One last thing I'm just going to do here before I move on is um, I'm going to uncomment some of this stuff. So this line here that I commented out previously, we in our unit tests we're setting a flag on our label engine settings to say this flag here, draw label rect only. And if I go and have a look at that one, this one says whether to draw only the label rect and not the actual label text used for unit tests. The reason I'm setting that one in my unit test is if I have a look at some of these other, not that one, these other reference images, I guess, that are coming out of this label engine test, we're only testing the render with this green box, which is like the actual placement of that label, not the label, the text inside. Uh, we're doing that because we want this test to be nice and robust and not to care about the slight differences we get in text rendering between, say, like Windows and Linux and Mac and stuff, where maybe there'll be like a couple of pixels different in how it does the text kerning and stuff, or the anti-aliasing on the outside of the text. So just easier for us to do switch on this flag, so we're only getting the green box. That's what we're testing. That's kind of the important stuff. We don't actually care about testing the text inside there for these unit tests. There's other tests elsewhere that test that the right stuff is written inside those boxes, but here we don't need that. So that's good. And I'm also going to uncomment this line where we basically turn off those uh, the rendering of the lines themselves. We don't want to see that. It's gone now. The actual lines. We're only caring about basically drawing those labels. We don't get a crash. And yeah, that's good. So do we still get our crash? Yeah. Okay, good. So um, now we've got a new unit test which replicates this bug. Um, and I'm just going to go back here. So here was my previous pull request that had that fix in there, and I wasn't 100% sure on that fix. So what I'm going to do now is I was working on master branch. I'm just going to do a git stash to store that unit test, chuck it in that git stash, switch across to this branch where I had my fix. Check out that. Um, I'll rebase it on master because I don't want to spend ages building it. So if I look here, this branch has got that fix, but it didn't have a unit test for it. So I'm just going to do git stash pop to get my unit test back. And I should see, yeah, okay, so there's my unit test. So now if I go back here, build this branch that's got my commit that fixed it, I should see that the crash is gone. All right, it's going to take a while to build anyway. And if this passes, like if it can run this now without crashing, the last thing I need to do is update that update my control image, that I just put that dummy thing in there to actually what we want to test this circumstance against. In this case, I guess doing that reference, actually checking the result of the render is a bit, mm, because really what this test is doing is it's making sure that we don't get a crash here. That's the bug where it's when we set up all this circumstance and we do a render, we get a crash in here. Uh, but we may as well. We've done all the work of writing the rest of that test. We may as well check it against the actual expected result, that where those labels should be placed, and then we'll have an even better unit test. Nearly there. Actually, while that's going, I'm just going to go back, have a look here in my pull requests, QGIS pull requests, and let's see if our so that previous pull request we did, where we just updated it before, still running through the different CI stuff on the QGIS build. So, like I said, that could take about 2 hours sometimes. Okay. Now we don't want it to crash this time. Okay, so it didn't crash. It still failed that unit test, and the reason is if I go back here, let's delete that, rerun that. If I look at this test report right down the bottom, because we're comparing the results, so we're comparing this thing against that junk image. But in this case, the actual rendered image looks good. We've got our two line labels. They're drawn in red here because they're overlapping. So that's just the way it's reflecting that they're, those labels normally wouldn't be placed. They're only being placed because in our test we put in all those settings to say draw overlapping and all that kind of stuff. So that's actually what we want our reference image to look like. So that's good. So I can grab that image from my temp folder, show all labels when no candidates. Yeah, that's good. I'll copy that and I'm just going to put it into replace my expected image with that one. Let's get that name, delete that, rename that like that. So here's my new control image. That's what it should look like when we have this circumstance. When I run this one, this should all pass now. And there we go. So now all our tests are passed, not getting crash. We fixed that bug. We'll do one last little check and we're going to go back in and we're going to run the main QGIS app. And I'll just make sure that if I load in that the project attached to the ticket, maybe there's a random chance that we just fixed a totally unrelated bug, and this one still is a problem, but let's see. No, it's working, it's not crashing, so that's good. So we've fixed the original ticket as well. Sure about that. So the last thing I have to do here is I'm just going to have to add my reference image, our new control image, expected show all labels. So I'm going to add that to the commit. That all looks good. So I'm also going to add the source for that test. Add unit test. So now my branch has got the fix and it's got a unit test. I'm just going to do this and I'm going to rebase and squash those two together because really they can be part of the same commit. They don't need to be two separate commits. So there we go. So there's the commit, and if I show what the contents is, so we've got our fix and our cleanup, and then we've got the unit test and the reference image. All good to go. So I'll push that up to my fork, and I have to force it because I did some rebasing there. Back here, let's have a look in the pull request. Refresh that. So yeah, there's our fix. Here's our unit test, and here's our new reference image. So that's all good to go. I can go back here and I can get rid of this label that we put on there before about requiring tests. Now I've got a test, it's ready to merge. So I'm going to say here, ready to merge, tests added. And then the last thing I'm going to do here, this bug has probably been here for, I don't know, like it's not new code. You could probably reproduce this same crash in QGIS 3.10, I reckon. So I'm going to backport this fix as well. So I'm going to backport it to that 3.14 branch and the 3.10 branch. When this has been reviewed and merged, uh, we'll get that automatic pull request for the backports, which looks something like this. So here's one of those automated ones that the GitHub action is basically created after the main pull request is merged. Cool. So now we're done. So we fixed two of the three bugs we looked at. The third one, we found the cause, but it was going to be too complicated to solve live. But we've got a nice, happy with this fix, better logic there, works nice all around. This one here, I'm happy with the that labeling engine code, still really complex. It still needs a lot of work to actually rename all those things and clean up the logic, but we've made it a little better. So we kind of helped a little bit. We've added a new unit test, so that's a good thing. And we fixed that crash. So there we go. That's pretty good outcome. Yeah, hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully it's kind of demystified some of what is actually going behind the scenes in QGIS development. If you have any questions, just ask them on the YouTube thing. You'll find the QGIS community is really happy to help out people who are, showing that they want to get involved, showing that they want to fix things or help with the project. And if you reach out to them, you'll find that there's generally people who are willing to mentor and kind of help you through this and get to this kind of stage. So yeah, thanks for joining.